Hey guys, welcome to your lesson on cognitive development. The first two lessons in this unit have been on physical development was the first one and social development was the second. So we're moving to cognitive development now. So we are going to introduce some developmental psychologists that are especially important in our studies in psychology. So we're going to start off with once conscious, how does the mind grow? Developmental psychologist Jean Piaget spent his life searching for answers to the same question. He studied the development of children's cognition, all the mental activities associated with thinking, knowing, remembering, and communicating. Piaget is huge in psychology. What was Piaget's belief about cognitive development? His studies led him to believe that a child's mind develops through a series of stages in an upward march from the newborn's simple reflexes to the adult's abstract reasoning power. For example, an 8-year-old can comprehend things a toddler cannot, and an adult can understand nuances and abstract concepts that a child cannot. How do we make sense of our experiences? Piaget's core idea was that our intellectual progression reflects an unceasing struggle to make sense of experiences. To this end, the maturing brain builds schemas, concepts or mental molds in which we pour our experiences. So a good example would be when you come in middle school into 7th grade, you don't have a schema for what fall camp is like, or you don't have a schema for what a middle school community is like or how it runs. But in 8th grade, you come in at the beginning of the year and you have a schema because you've been through it. So a schema is an idea or a model for a schema for doggy might include 4 legs, furry coat, long tail, wet tongue, cold nose, friendly, and fun. How does a child add new items to existing schemas? So when first seeing a cat, a child may think of it in relation to their schema of doggy, 4 legs, furry, long tail, cold nose, and assimilate means add, this new example into their existing schema. So now Alexandra sees a cat and calls it a doggy. She's trying to assimilate this new animal into an existing schema. Her mother tells her, no, it's a cat. What if a new example doesn't fit our existing schema? So if the new example doesn't fit it, we receive correction and need to modify our understanding. So this is called accommodation. So when she sees the dog, she's trying to assimilate into her new schema, or into her existing schema rather, and her mom tells her, no, it's a cat. That's called accommodation. So how does accommodation increase cognition? So by accommodating or changing the existing schema and adding new characteristics to distinguish doggy from cat, we begin to increase cognitive understanding of our world. So Alexandra accommodates her schema for furry 4-legged animals, distinguishing dogs from cats. Over time, her schemas become more sophisticated as she learns to distinguish the pets of family and friends by name. Schemas develop throughout the lifespan. So although Piaget studied the development of schemas and the assimilation and accommodation of them in children, this process continues throughout our lives as we bring new information into our experience. Let's consider some changes to schemas that we may have accommodated in later life. How has our schema of love changed over time? A generation ago, most people had a schema of marriage as a union between a man and a woman. Today, in 2001, the Netherlands was the first country to change its marriage laws to accommodate same-sex marriage. Today, more than 20 other countries have also legalized same-sex marriage. Exam tip 1, be able to identify what it means to assimilate and accommodate schemas. These are confusing terms on the AP exam. So assimilate means to add and accommodate means to change. What are Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development? So Piaget believed that children construct their understanding of the world while interacting with it. In Piaget's view, cognitive development consisted of 4 major stages: sensoromotor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. The sensoromotor stage is Piaget's theory, the stage from birth to nearly 2 years of age, during which infants know the world mostly in terms of their sensory impressions, what they see, hear, etc., and motor activities, how they move. So as we're moving through this, be taking notes, like mental notes or jotting off to the side of your outline of how you can include these things in your scrapbook, in the timeline of your life. What is object permanence? So young infants lack object permanence. This is the awareness that objects continue to exist even when not perceived. How did Piaget test object permanence? Well, very young babies seem to live in the present. Out of sight is out of mind. In one test, Piaget showed an infant an appealing toy and then covered it with his hat. Before the age of 6 months, the infant acted as if the toy ceased to exist. By 8 months, infants began exhibiting memory for things no longer seen and search for the toy. They acquire object permanence, so they know that the object just didn't disappear. Criticism of Piaget. So researchers believe Piaget and his followers underestimated young children's competence and that infants are smarter than Piaget appreciated. Young children think like little scientists. They test ideas, make causal inferences, and learn from statistical patterns. So, René Bayard-Jeon devised impossible scenes for infant subjects to view, such as a car seeming to pass through a solid object, a ball stopping in midair, or an object violating object permanence by magically disappearing. Bayard-Jeon saw that infants look longer at and explore those impossible scenes. Why do infants show this visual bias? Because impossible events violate infants' expectations. So, do infants have math sense? Psychologist Karen Wynn showed 5-month-olds 1 or 2 objects, then she hid the objects behind a screen and visibly removed or added 1. What were the results? When she lifted the screen, the infant sometimes did a double take, staring longer when shown a wrong number of objects. So, what is the pre-operational stage? In Piaget's theory, this stage, from about 2 to 6 or 7 years old, during which a child learns to use language but does not yet comprehend the mental operations of concrete logic. The principle which Piaget believed to be a part of concrete operational reasoning is conservation. This is that properties such as mass, volume, and number remain the same despite changes in the forms of objects. How did he test for conservation? This visually focused pre-operational child does not yet understand the principle of conservation. When the milk is poured into a tall, narrow glass, it suddenly seems like more than when it was in the shorter, wider glass. In another year or so, she will understand that the amount stays the same. So I know in science you guys have all been exposed to the law of conservation of matter or mass, in which matter cannot be created or destroyed, right? So that's really, this is pretty much the same thing. It's the same idea that if you take milk from one container and you put it into a different container, it might look like there's more or less milk, but there's not, because you can't just create something out of nothing, and you can't destroy something without something. All right, what is pretend play? This is the acting out of stories which involve multiple perspectives, the playful manipulation of ideas and emotions, and the use of symbols. What research has been conducted on symbolic function in cognitive development? Psychologist Judy DeLoach showed children a model of a room and hid a miniature stuffed dog behind its miniature couch. The 2.5-year-old subjects easily remembered where to find the miniature toy, but they could not use the model to locate an actual stuffed dog behind a couch in a real room. 3-year-olds, only 6 months older, usually went right to the actual stuffed animal in the room, showing they could think of the model as a symbol for the room. What is egocentrism? So in Piaget's theory, the pre-operational child's difficulty taking another's point of view. A 4-year-old girl shows her grandpa a match on 2 memory card games, memory game cards with matching pictures that faced her, not grandpa. Examples of egocentrism. Asked to show mommy your picture. 2-year-old Gabriella holds the picture up facing her own eyes. 3-year-old Gray makes himself invisible by putting his hands over his eyes, assuming that if he can't see his grandparents, they can't see him. And 4-year-old Nora shows her aunt her new toys over a telephone call, thinking her aunt can see them too. Careful, AP exam tip. Egocentric is not the same as egotistical. Egocentric means you can't take someone else's point of view. Egotistical means you're pretty full of yourself. All right, what is theory of mind? Theory of mind is people's ideas about their own and others' mental states, about their feelings, perceptions, and thoughts, and the behaviors these might predict. How does theory of mind reveal itself? With time, the ability to take another's perspective develops. Children come to understand what made a playmate angry, when a sibling will share, and what might make a parent buy a toy. They begin to tease, empathize, and persuade. And when making decisions, developing children use their understanding of how their actions will make others feel. How is theory of mind tested? Children viewed a doll named Sally leaving her ball in a red cupboard. Another doll, Anne, then moved the ball to a blue cupboard. When Sally returns, where will she look for the ball? When asked the question above, 85% of the children in the study answered the question correctly. This showed that although the subjects knew the ball had been moved, they demonstrated theory of mind in knowing that Sally would not have known. All right, moving into the next stage. What is the concrete operational stage? In Piaget's theory, the stage of cognitive development from about 7 to 11 years of age, during which children gain the mental operations that enable them to think logically about events. Child humor. Mr. Jones went into a restaurant and ordered a whole pizza for his dinner. When the waiter asked if he wanted it cut into 6 or 8 pieces, Mr. Jones said, "Oh, you'd better make it 6. I could never eat 8 pieces." This type of joke would be readily understood by a child in the concrete operations stage. What is the formal operational stage? In Piaget's theory, the stage of cognitive development, normally beginning about age 12, during which people begin to think logically about abstract concepts. What characterizes the formal operational stage? By age 12, our reasoning expands from the purely concrete, involving actual experience, to encompass abstract thinking, involving imagined realities and symbols. As children approach adolescence, said Piaget, they can ponder hypothetical propositions and deduce consequences. If this, then that kind of things. Systematic reasoning, what Piaget called formal operational thinking, is now within their grasp. Who was Lev Vygotsky? Vygotsky, pictured here with his daughter, was a Russian developmental psychologist. He studied how a child's mind feeds on the language of social interaction. How did Piaget's view of cognitive development differ from that of Vygotsky's? As Piaget was forming his theory of cognitive development, Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky was also studying how children think and learn. Where Piaget emphasized how the child's mind grows through interaction with the physical environment, Vygotsky emphasized how the child's mind grows through interaction with the social environment. If Piaget's child was a young scientist, Vygotsky's was a young apprentice. So what is scaffolding? Scaffolding is a framework that offers children temporary support as they develop higher levels of thinking. By giving children new words and mentoring them, parents, teachers, and other children provide a temporary scaffold from which children can step to higher levels of thinking. We do scaffolding all day long in Montessori, you guys. Scaffolding when you're working in your table groups, teachers scaffold. It happens all the time. So what was Vygotsky's view of child cognitive development? Effective mentoring occurs when children are developmentally ready to learn a new skill. For Vygotsky, a child's zone of proximal development, this is ZPD, it's the zone between what a child can and can't do. It's what a child can do with help. Children learn best when their social environment presents them with something in the sweet spot between too easy and too difficult. What is the prevalence of autism spectrum disorder? So we're moving into a different section of this lesson. So once believed to affect 1 in 2,500, ASD now gets diagnosed in 1 in 68 American children by age 8. But the reported rates vary by place, with New Jersey having 4 times the reported prevalence of Alabama, while Britain's children have a 1 in 100 rate, and South Korea's 1 in 38. What characterizes ASD? The underlying source of ASD symptoms seem to be poor communication among brain regions that normally work together to let us take another's viewpoint. From age 2 months on, as other children spend more and more time looking into others' eyes, those who later develop ASD do so less and less. People with ASD are said to have an impaired theory of mind. When Sally returns, where would she look for the ball? Only 20% of children with autism answered the question correctly in Baron Cohen's 1995 study, compared to 85% of non-impaired children. Most answered that Sally would look in the blue cupboard, evidence that they knew the ball had been moved, but not recognizing that Sally did not know this. How does the experience of ASD differ along the spectrum? ASD has differing levels of severity. About half of people with ASD experience a fair or even good outcome. Some generally function at a high level. They have normal intelligence, often accompanied by exceptional skill or talent in a specific area, but deficient social and communication skills and a tendency to become distracted by irrelevant stimuli. Those at the spectrum's more severe end struggle to use language. What biological factors, nature, do or do not contribute to ASD? So remember, nature, nurture. Nature, we're talking biological factors. Nurture, we're talking environmental. So studies suggest that the prenatal environment matters, especially when altered by maternal infection and inflammation, psychiatric drug use, or stress hormones. Childhood vaccinations do not contribute to ASD. Biological factors, including genetic influences and abnormal brain development, also contribute to ASD. Is a diagnosis of ASD given more often for boys or girls? ASD afflicts about 3 boys for every girl. Psychologist Simon Baron-Cohen believes this is because boys are often systemizers. They tend to understand things according to rules or laws, as in mathematical and mechanical systems. Girls, he contends, are naturally predisposed to be empathizers. They tend to excel at reading facial expressions and gestures. What research did Baron-Cohen conduct on ASD? Baron-Cohen and his Cambridge University colleagues collaborated with Britain's National Autistic Society and a film production company. Knowing that television shows with vehicles have been popular among kids with ASD, they created animations with toy vehicle characters in a pretend boy's bedroom, grafting emotion-conveying faces onto toy trams, trains, and tractors. What happens in the television show? Well, after the boy leaves for school, the characters come to life and have experiences that lead them to display various emotions. What happened next? After viewing the television programming, the child subjects were asked to match the correct face with the story. The neighbor's dog has bitten people before. He is barking at Luis. Point to the face that shows how Luis is feeling. What were the results of this research? The children were surprisingly able to generalize what they had learned to a new real-life context. By the intervention's end, their previously deficient ability to recognize emotion on real faces now equaled that of children without ASD. Pretty cool.